My name is Michael Clark.
And my name is Joan Basudua, and Michael and I will be talking about how anime and cartoons are different. And Michael's gonna get started.
With the growing development of visual media in the modern era, there has come a misconception that American cartoons, often intended for children, and Japanese anime, often intended for older audiences of teenagers and adults alike, are generally the same thing. For example, Naruto, Hunter x Hunter, and Attack on Titan are a small percentage of popular anime not watched only in Japan, but also around the world. Meanwhile, Phineas and Ferb, Frozen, and Teen Titans are also a small percentage of popular American cartoons that are watched all around the world. But unlike the Japanese shows just listed, American shows are relatively meant for children or young teenagers, perhaps 12 or 13 at most. As a result of this, people criticize adults and teenagers for watching anime because of the misconception that it is childish and simply a cartoon only meant for kids. This often happens when people grow up in a place where these American cartoons are mostly seen and they're intended for kids, and they don't take a moment to see that they're very different, and at a glance they do look similar, but that's just on the surface. However, there are many adults worldwide who watch Frozen, Lion King, many other Disney movies over and over again, regardless of the stipulation that Disney is often just for kids. Although some people may call anime masterpieces of art, while others just call it another hobby, one thing is certain. Calling anime a cartoon is a gross oversimplification and is technically incorrect. Cartoons and anime differ from each other in many ways, both stylistically and with the content within them.
One such example of how anime is different from a cartoon is that it uses dynamic immobility according to Steinberg. This means that anime movements are more simple and less flowy like a cartoon. According to Tsugada Nobuyuki, anime is an animation from that is cell-based, uses many time-saving devices, thus developing a style of a limited animation. This style's differences are often seen when using immobile images with minor quick movements rather than typical flowing frame-by-frame animation one would expect from a cartoon. Contrasting this, a cartoon style is more dynamic with its body languages and facial expressions, with more focus on exaggeration rather than realism, with the setting of the show or movies.
Cartoon producers are also more likely to use 3D animation for large, expensive movies like WALL-E or Madagascar, or sometimes just with shows such as Jimmy Neutron. They use more rounded, unrealistic character creations, proportions, and styles, as stated within the Unlimited Animation Movement in Modern Architecture and the Modern Cartoon book. Anime, on the other hand, uses an animatic interval as a common animation technique, which means they get to use a gap between layers of the images that unfold across media forms. It's a special way that they manage to save time and save money while also maintaining the same quality in their dynamic immobility style. Anime is also more accustomed to telling a story or a narrative and having it come before the visual aspects in some cases. Meanwhile, cartoons often lack the sort of depth that such a story provides, instead focusing on the visual aspects over the story, if there is a story to begin with. As a result, cartoons are often seen for children and have minimal story elements present. Think of this as you would looking at a Cartoon Network show where there's plenty of cartoons that you can watch for random episodes across any season, and you'll get the gist of pretty much all of them. But if you watch an anime and only pick 4 random episodes out of the whole thing, you'll be very lost, very confused, and probably spoil yourself for many of the details about the plot that's very important to it. Also, by the same sources before, it's stated that the design gaze also prizes a focus on the visual elements of the surface backgrounds, color compositions, odd arrangements of shapes, or the depth of the narrative. This means that in a cartoon, perhaps the slapstick and the effects of it are more important than telling any form of story, perhaps even the story of the episode. Perhaps the episode of a cartoon in America is just the visual aspect or a visual joke. Meanwhile, in an anime, that's much less likely to happen, if it happens pretty much virtually at all.
Also, to quote Nobuyuki, anime has a strong tendency towards the development of complex human relationships, stories, and worlds. There are almost always a plot in an anime, and there is some sort of character development. This is far from a cartoon. A cartoon has no plot, and the characters don't have any development. The examples listed before are clear examples of the difference between an anime plot and no cartoon plot. Another big difference of an anime and a cartoon is where they originated from. Anime came from Japan in 1914, whereas cartoons were made in America in 1908 with the very first cartoon, Mickey Mouse. Now, Mickey Mouse was used as a comedic relief, while anime in Japan was used for more of a personal touch. An example would be they used anime, the Japanese government used anime as propaganda against their enemies. And then over the years, anime came to represent more personal topics such as sexual violence or just real world stuff, unlike cartoons where it's just comedy. It's comedy in a drawing style.
With the numerous differences in style, animation, content, and culture listed before, it's clear to see that the American cartoon and the Japanese anime are, in fact, very different for a multitude of reasons. While there is a growing understanding of the differences, many people are still very ignorant of the fact that the two animation mediums are very distinct. But as the Japanese animation industry continues to grow, perhaps within the next decade or so, the stigma will change and the Western audiences will become more open to the idea of watching shows that are not necessarily as childish as they once thought. Inversely, perhaps within that time we will see more American animation become more adult rather than a majority of it being produced simply for children. Because I believe that American writers and animators could make a very complex story if they just sort of broke the stigma that it's only for kids and they only need to try as hard as a kids show should, and that shouldn't be the case, because it's not the case in Japan, shouldn't be the case here, and I believe that both of the industries have a great deal to learn from one another.